So I'm very, very pleased to introduce Chris, and thank you for coming along this morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I'd like to initially thank Alan and ANZSOG for the opportunity to address conference delegates this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the meeting is being held, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. As is the fashion, I can today announce that I've been in my role for 116 days. And while, unlike the Premier and the Government, I don't have a 39-point action plan, much to your relief, I do have a reasonable understanding of the public sector from roles in 4 other Australian jurisdictions, as Alan mentioned, and an emerging understanding of the New South Wales public sector. Both the conference theme, Putting Citizens First, Engagement in Policy and Service Delivery for the 21st Century, and the topic of my speech this morning, Restoring Trust in Government, have universal application to public administration and are indeed central to many of the fundamental challenges facing government and its institutions. This morning, I'd like to address a number of areas where we, as public servants, have the ability to both influence and initiate the process of restoring trust in government, and more particularly, through the way we work with the citizens of New South Wales, a trust in and of the public sector. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Along with the cheque is in the mail, this phrase has entered the lexicon as a classic statement of counter-intuition. But has it, and the implication of cynicism and mistrust, always been so? To begin, let me provide some context. Various surveys and studies have found that since the mid-1960s, public trust in government and political institutions has been decreasing in virtually all of the advanced industrial democracies. Research conducted using both waves of the World Values Survey, conducted in the early 1980s between 81 and 84, and the early 1990s between 1990 and 93, provides substantial support for theories that focus on the performance of governments and political institutions to explain citizens' declining confidence in them. A 2005 survey of Canadian citizens found that the degree to which citizens trust government is dependent upon a number of factors. The survey found that citizen trust and confidence is promoted when government organisations, 1, provide good leadership and management, a 50 to 65% impact, 2, provide equal and ethical treatment, a 10 to 15% impact, 3, provide quality services, a 10 to 20% impact, and 4, provide services that meet citizens and community needs, a 10 to 25% impact. These measures, however, don't account for declining confidence related to government's management of the economy. Many studies have found that citizens have less trust in governments that cannot generate economic growth, create jobs, and competently deliver social services, and that conversely, governments that can bring about economic growth, create jobs, provide access to education and deliver services in an easy and transparent manner are more trusted. The most extensive evidence on public trust in government comes from the United States and the American National Election Studies data series. Early readings from the late 1950s revealed a largely supportive public, with most people believing that one could trust government to do the right thing, that there were few dishonest people in government, that most officials knew what they were doing, and that government was run for the benefit of all. These positive feelings were relatively unchanged until the mid-1960s, and then declined very sharply. For instance, in 1964, 75% of the American public believed they could trust their government to do the right thing most of the time. By 1995, only 15% did so. Closer to home, New Zealand studies reflect a similar trend. In 1985, 8.5% of New Zealanders had a great deal of confidence in their government, but by 1998, this had fallen to 2.5%. A study conducted in the United States using empirical evidence contends that the pervasiveness of the trend across advanced industrial democracies cannot be explained simply on the basis of government performance. This is especially so as the latter half of the 20th century has been a time of generally improving standards of living characterised by rising affluence, expanding education and improved social opportunities for most citizens. Whilst there are national explanations for the drop in trust in government, the war in Vietnam, Watergate and the Bill and Monica saga in the case of the United States, it's actually unreasonable to assume that a simultaneous decline of trust over the past 40 or more years throughout the advanced industrial democracies is purely coincidental. This prompts one to look beyond national conditions and take account of factors that are broadly affecting the advanced industrial democracies as a group. This then leads us to conclude that general forces of social change are affecting these nations, including Australia, for which there's no nation-specific empirical longitudinal data. These changes, described as social modernisation, are transforming the relationship between citizen and state. Scepticism of the political process has also grown more rapidly amongst the young and better educated, with the new style of politics represented by less deference to authority, more assertive styles of action, and higher expectations of the democratic process. It is suggested that changing citizen values and expectations have created a new political zeitgeist which generates greater scepticism of government. Globalisation, a greater interconnectedness through information and communications technology, as well as increased advocacy of NGOs, have also contributed to making citizens much more aware of their rights and therefore more demanding of their governments. Recent events in the Middle East have made this dramatically apparent. A literature review produced for the 7th Global Forum on Reinventing Government explores the theme of building trust in government and concludes that expectations of citizens vis-a-vis their governments and political representatives in the era of globalisation have changed with the possible emergence of a new civic culture. The new civic culture cherishes trust for itself, demands sincerity and truthfulness in the words and deeds of representatives. It wants to be able to monitor government performance much more closely than before, and suggests that governments today would be better off applying programs and policies that enhance trust in government directly, rendering politics more transparent and dispensing the power of political decision-making to foster accountability. Partially prompted by popular dissatisfaction with the governing process, contemporary democracies have implemented reforms to expand access, increase transparency and improve accountability of government. Political and social parameters are also at play, with political scandals, seemingly frequent findings of corruption and the sometimes disproportionate focus of the media on these issues, contributing their fair share to the decline of trust in government institutions and political leaders. However, these events tend to only reinforce the generally poor impressions of government already held by an increasingly cynical public. Governments here in Australia have clearly recognised the importance of addressing the issue of trust. As opposition leader, the now New South Wales Premier made it clear in a speech to the Institute of Chartered Secretaries Australia that the New South Wales Liberals and Nationals were resolved to restoring trust in public institutions and to, quote, unite the public sector, individuals and communities and elected representatives in a network of trust. A number of initiatives that are currently being pursued in New South Wales are testimony to this commitment. The establishment of a Public Service Commission, legislation embedding new public sector values and an ethical framework, the strengthening of whistleblower protections, the imminent appointment of a Customer Service Commissioner, and the creation of Infrastructure New South Wales, and I'll return to each of these shortly. As the literature reveals, there are various dimensions to the construct of trust, and similarly numerous factors that serve as a basis for understanding citizens' declining trust in government. The OECD, in recognising this, refers to the implementation of the so-called ITARI principle as the basis for trust building and performance improvements in the public sector. The 5 components that comprise the ITARI principle won't be unfamiliar to people: integrity, transparency, accountability, responsiveness, and inclusiveness. The principle of inclusiveness in particular resonates with the conference theme of putting citizens first. In order to ensure that we are able to act in an inclusive manner when dealing with citizens, community and stakeholders, the public sector needs to address the critical challenge of increasing transparency in how decisions are made and implemented by paving new ways to increase citizen and stakeholder participation and engagement in formulating public services and products. Facilitating a greater involvement and engagement with and amongst stakeholders is critical to assisting government deliver on the expectations of citizens. Critical to the way government interacts with key stakeholders, public servants, citizens and communities, is the creation of the network of trust referred to by the Premier. The vision is for citizens to be able to trust public institutions and to defend their interests, politicians and ministers to be able to trust that the public service will give them objective, high quality and fearless advice, public servants to trust government to do what it says, and public servants valued by government and citizens for their integrity, impartiality and expertise. Key to facilitating a new vision of government stakeholder interactions based on mutual trust are a number of initiatives currently being pursued by the New South Wales Government. The new Public Service Commission will work with public servants and public sector workers as stakeholders to restore and maintain the highest levels of integrity, impartiality, ability, accountability and leadership. It will also explore ways in which the public sector can develop its people through enhanced mobility, whether via exchanges between departments, agencies and other jurisdictions, or secondments with the private and community sectors. A Customer Service Commissioner will work to ensure that government interactions with the citizens of New South Wales meet the needs of the citizens. The Premier, in a pre-election address to CEDA, indicated that the purpose of the Commissioner is to bring the interest of public service customers and the defence of public value and public interest right to the heart of decision-making, develop practical and sustainable ways to give government's customers the value and results they deserve, and ensure customer-centred services are a strategic priority for government, with ministers to be the champions of customers within their portfolios. The Premier further identified 5 customer service principles that provide a framework for implementing this new direction. Making customer focus a leadership issue, simplifying government, redesigning public service delivery to suit people, not bureaucracies, devolving authority to people, communities and frontline staff, and measuring results and ensuring accountability. A third body, Infrastructure New South Wales, has been established in legislation to work with the private sector to deliver coordinated infrastructure planning across the whole of government, using the most efficient and effective funding mechanisms available to deliver the best results possible. It'll be responsible for preparing a 20-year state infrastructure strategy for New South Wales, along with detailed 5-year infrastructure plans that will set out the details of projects, sequencing and funding arrangements in the forward estimates of the New South Wales budget. The intention of the government in establishing this body is to ensure independent, non-political infrastructure decision-making. The impact of Infrastructure New South Wales would be to bring private sector expertise to bear in this decision-making. Giving more than lip service to the conference theme of putting citizens first means, in one sense, that the public sector must look beyond itself for developing solutions to public problems. We need to both understand and acknowledge that the public sector does not hold all the answers, and by extension necessarily the expertise, capacity and resources to meet the ever-evolving needs and expectations of citizens. The custom and practice, dare I say culture, of introspection is the single greatest risk to the relevance and effectiveness of the public service. We must also ensure that we engage with communities and stakeholders so as to achieve sustainable citizen-focused outcomes when developing and implementing policies or service delivery solutions. Furthermore, blindly following rules and processes risks creating solutions which simply address internal control parameters and/or which align with conventional wisdoms, and I'll come back to that point. An outward-looking public sector will establish a dialogue with communities